The night was dark and cold, the sky heavy with black clouds that hid the stars. The rain came down hard, hitting the muddy ground in endless streams. The wind howled through the empty streets of the human settlement, carrying with it the smell of wet metal and smoke. Daniel stood at the main gate, his coat soaked, his hands gripping the cold iron bars. He was on guard duty tonight, a job most men disliked. The gate was the only thing between the settlement and the empty, dangerous lands beyond, far out in the rain. He saw a shape moving slowly. It swayed from side to side, as if struggling to walk. Daniel narrowed his eyes. The rain blurred his vision, but the shape grew clearer with every step. It was a woman, her clothes torn and sticking to her skin, and in her arms she held a small child. She stumbled and fell to her knees just before the gate. Her voice came out in a broken whisper. "Take my life. Just feed my son." Daniel froze. The words cut through the rain like a knife. The boy in her arms was thin, his skin pale, his eyes half closed. The woman was shaking, her lips blue from the cold. Two other guards came up beside Daniel. One of them muttered, "Could be a trick. Maybe she's a spy." The other guard nodded. "Or bait to get us to open the gate." Daniel looked again at the boy. The child's head rested limply on his mother's shoulder. He let out a weak cough, almost too small to hear over the storm. Daniel's chest tightened. This didn't look like a trap. This looked like desperation. The woman lifted her head slowly. Her eyes met Daniel's. There was no anger, no trickery, only fear and pleading. "Please," she said. "He hasn't eaten in days." The guards shook their heads. "We can't let her in," one said. "We barely have enough food for ourselves." The rules were clear, no outsiders without approval from the settlement leader. But Daniel's hands moved on their own. He pulled the lever and the gate creaked open. The other guards swore under their breath, but he stepped out into the rain. He reached the woman and took the boy gently from her arms. The child was frighteningly light. As if made of feathers and bones, the woman tried to stand, but her legs gave way. Daniel hooked his arm under hers and lifted her. She was freezing, her skin like ice. As they entered the gate, the settlement lights glowed dim in the rain. A few people peered from doorways, whispering. The leader's assistant rushed over, his face hard. "What is this?" he demanded. She and her boy were outside. Daniel said, "He's starving." The assistant's eyes narrowed. "And you thought it was your place to bring them in?" "We can't feed strangers." "I'll feed them," Daniel said firmly, "from my own share." The woman's head turned at his words. She looked at him as if she couldn't understand why a human she had never met would say such a thing. He carried the boy to his small home near the south wall, the rain dripping from his hair and clothes inside. He placed the child on the bed and wrapped him in a dry blanket. He poured a cup of warm water and helped the boy drink slowly. The woman stood by the door, unsure if she should come closer. "Sit," Daniel told her, pointing to a chair. She hesitated, then obeyed, her hands trembling. "What's your name?" He asked. "Leora," she whispered. "My son is Rian." Daniel heated a small bowl of soup. The smell filled the small room. Rian's eyes opened wider. He reached weakly for the spoon. Daniel fed him slowly, watching as a little color returned to his cheeks. Leora watched without touching the food. Daniel noticed. "You should eat too," he said. She shook her head. "It's for him." Daniel pushed the bowl toward her. "There's more. Eat." For the first time, she took a small bite, her eyes closing for a moment, as if even this simple food was a treasure. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside, the air felt a little warmer. Daniel knew the settlement leaders wouldn't be happy about this. But looking at the boy, he didn't care. He had made his choice. As he added more wood to the small fire, he thought of the way she had fallen to her knees in the rain. Offering her life for her sons, he wondered what could have driven her to such a place. and what dangers might still be following her. But tonight, he decided, she and the boy would sleep under his roof, warm and fed, and tomorrow he would find out the rest of their story. The morning came slowly. The storm had passed, leaving behind gray clouds and puddles of water across the settlement. Daniel stepped outside his small home. The air was cold but calm. In the distance, he could hear the sound of hammers and voices. As people started their daily work, inside, Leora sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands folded tightly in her lap. Rian slept beside her, his breathing steadier than last night. She looked different in the daylight. Her face still pale, but her eyes clearer. Daniel placed a small loaf of bread on the table. "It's not much, but it's fresh," he said. Leora nodded in thanks, tearing off a small piece and placing it in her son's hand when he awoke. Rian chewed slowly, as if he was not used to having real food. A knock came at the door. Daniel opened it to see the settlement leader, a tall man named Hale. His arms crossed, his eyes sharp. Behind him stood two other guards. Hale stepped inside, without asking, his gaze moving from Leora to the boy. "You brought them in against my orders," Hale said, his voice low but hard. "Do you know what trouble this could bring?" Daniel didn't flinch. "I know what leaving them outside would bring." Hale's eyes narrowed. "We barely have enough for ourselves. Strangers bring danger, disease, and attention we don't want." "They're not a threat," Daniel replied, glancing at Leora. "They're just hungry." Leora lowered her head, speaking softly. "We can work, we can clean, cook, anything." Hale's attention shifted to her. "Work doesn't feed empty mouths," he said coldly. Daniel stepped closer to Hale. "I'll feed them from my own share. No one else will lose anything because of them." Hale studied Daniel for a long moment, then turned toward the door. "If anything happens because of them, it's on you," he warned, and left Leora. Eyes followed Hale until he was gone. Then she turned to Daniel. "Why do you do this for us?" she asked, her voice almost afraid of the answer. Daniel shrugged, because someone should. For the rest of the morning, Daniel stayed close to his home, watching for curious eyes. People in the settlement passed by slowly, some whispering, others openly staring. A few women brought extra water and blankets, slipping them into Daniel's hands before walking away, not saying a word. By afternoon, Leora began to move about the small space. Tidying the table, folding the blankets, she asked Daniel where she could get cleaning supplies. He pointed her toward a small storage room. She carried herself with quiet purpose, as if keeping busy helped her forget her fear. When Rian was awake and feeling stronger, Daniel took them outside. The boy's eyes widened at the sight of the settlement, rows of wooden homes, smoke rising from chimneys, people mending fences, trading goods, carrying baskets. Children played near the well, their laughter echoing between the houses. But when they saw Rian, they stopped, staring at him with curious eyes. Some whispered to each other. Rian hid behind Leora's leg. Clutching her skirt, Daniel knelt beside him. "It's all right. They're just curious," he said. Rian peeked out, but didn't let go of his mother. That evening, Daniel shared his food with them again. The small room smelled of stew and bread. Leora ate slowly, making sure Rian had enough first. Daniel noticed the way she always put him before herself, even in small things, as the firelight flickered. Daniel asked, "Where were you before this?" Leora's face tightened, her eyes on the flames. "Far from here," she said. "We ran for many days. We slept in cold places, hid in caves, because they were coming for us." Daniel leaned forward. "Who?" She hesitated, then whispered. "Slavers." The word seemed to hang heavy in the air. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Are they close?" He asked. Leora shook her head. "Not yet, but they never stopped looking." The thought stayed in Daniel's mind long after they went to sleep. Outside, the settlement was quiet. The rain from the night before had washed away footprints and tracks. But he knew if these slavers were determined, it was only a matter of time before trouble found them as he sat by the window, watching the dark streets. Daniel knew he had already made his choice. No matter what came, he would not hand them over. The door he had opened last night was not just the gate, it was a promise, one he had no intention of breaking. By the next morning, the rain had stopped completely, leaving the air fresh but heavy with the smell of wet soil and smoke from cooking fires. Daniel stepped out of his home to fetch water from the well, feeling eyes on him as soon as he walked. Into the open, people in the settlement moved about with their morning routines. But their voices were lower, their glances sharper. It was clear that word of Leora and her son had spread quickly. Two older men leaned against a wall, speaking in hushed tones, but loud enough for Daniel to hear. He brought in an alien woman. Can you believe that? One said, and a child. The other replied, what if they're dangerous? Daniel ignored them, but he could feel their stares burning into his back as he filled the water bucket. Back inside, Leora was sitting with Rian, helping him chew small pieces of bread. The boy's color was slowly returning, but he still looked thin and fragile. She glanced up when Daniel came in, her eyes soft with thanks, but also shadowed by worry. People are talking, Daniel said quietly. Setting the water down, Leora looked down at her hands. They will not want us here, she murmured. Daniel sat across from her. Some won't, but not everyone feels the same, he said. And it was true that afternoon. One of the women from the settlement stopped by with a small basket of vegetables. She didn't say much, just placed it on the table and left with a small nod. Still, the whispers grew louder each day. Children pointed at Rian when he peeked outside. Some laughed. Some frowned, and Leora began keeping him inside unless Daniel was with them. On the fourth day, Leora opened up more. She sat by the fire while Daniel repaired a broken chair. Her voice was quiet at first. We lived far to the east. In a small village, she began. It was peaceful until the slavers came. Daniel paused his work, listening. They came in ships, she said, her hands tightening in her lap. They took many. They sold them in markets. They do not care if someone is young or old, strong or weak. Her voice cracked slightly, but she kept going. My husband. He tried to fight. They killed him. Rian looked up at her with sad eyes, not fully understanding, but knowing it was something heavy. Daniel's chest tightened at her words. How did you escape? He asked. Leora's gaze drifted toward the dub window. We ran at night, hiding in fields, moving when the moons were dark. There were others with us, but one by one, they were taken or lost, she said. In the end, it was just me and Rian. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the crackle of the fire. Daniel wanted to tell her she was safe now, but he knew safety was never certain that evening. When Daniel stepped out to speak with a supply runner, he heard two guards near the gate muttering, if those slavers track her here, we'll all pay for it, one said. The other replied, Hallie should throw them out before that happens. Daniel clenched his jaw. His instincts told him trouble was coming. And not just from whispers. That night, as the settlement settled into quiet, a sudden flare shot up into the sky from the western watchpost. Its red light glowing against the clouds. It was the signal for possible danger. Daniel grabbed his coat and stepped outside. Other guards were already gathering near the gate. Hale stood in the center, his expression grim. What is it? Daniel asked. Scouts spotted movement on the ridge. Hale said, could be traitors, could be worse. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Slavers, he muttered under his breath. Hale shot him a sharp look. We don't know yet, but we'll find out soon. Back at his home, Daniel found Leora standing near the window, Riam clinging to her leg, her face pale. I saw the light, she said. What does it mean? "It means someone's out there," Daniel replied. "Stay inside. Keep the door locked." Leora's hands shook slightly as she nodded. Daniel could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear that had likely driven her through nights of running. And hiding, he stepped closer, speaking firmly. "No matter what happens, I won't let them take you." She looked at him for a long moment, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't know what they will do to you if you stand in their way." Daniel gave a faint smile. "Maybe they don't know what I will do if they try." Outside, the night was quiet again, but the air felt heavy, like the stillness before a storm. Daniel knew the whispers in the settlement were about to turn into something much louder. And soon, the choice to protect Leora and Rian would no longer be his alone. It would be a fight the whole settlement might have to face. The next day began with a strange quiet, the usual sound of hammers. Carts and chatter was softer, as if the whole settlement was holding its breath. Daniel could feel the tension in the air. Even before he reached the gate, Hale was already there, standing with 3 guards, his eyes fixed on the distant ridge. Daniel followed his gaze and saw small specks moving slowly against the gray horizon. They were too far to make out clearly. But the way they moved was careful, deliberate. "Scouts." Again, Hale said without looking at Daniel. "They've been circling since dawn." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Slavers," he muttered. Hale gave no answer. But his silence was enough to confirm the thought. By midday, more people in the settlement had heard the news. Whispers turned into hurried conversations. Some were already packing small bundles, ready to flee if needed. At Daniel's home, Leora was quiet. Her movements sharp and quick, as she prepared a small bag with food and water. Rian sat in the corner, hugging his knees, watching her with wide eyes. "You're leaving?" Daniel asked as he stepped inside. Leora didn't meet his gaze. "If I go, they will follow me, and maybe they will leave you all alone," she said, her voice low but firm. Daniel shook his head. "That's not how they work. They don't just take what they came for. They take more. They take everything." Leora stopped packing for a moment, her hands trembling. "You don't understand, Daniel. They will kill you for protecting me." "I understand enough," Daniel said, his voice steady. "And I'm still not letting you walk out into their hands." Outside, the guards reinforced the main gate. Adding wooden beams and metal bars, Hale called for everyone to stay indoors. After sunset, children were rushed inside, doors bolted, windows shuttered. That night, the first real sign came: a small fire on the ridge. A signal. Daniel knew they were watching, maybe even counting how many guards were on the wall. Hale called an urgent meeting in the small council hall. Daniel stood beside him as the room filled with worried faces. "They're not moving yet," Hale said to the crowd, "but they will." Some voices in the room spoke up quickly. "Then give them the woman and the boy." One man said, "It's their problem, not ours." Another woman added, "We can't risk everyone for 2 strangers." Daniel stepped forward before Hale could speak, his voice hard. "If you hand them over, it won't stop there. Slavers will see us as weak. Next time, it will be your families they take." A few nodded in agreement, but others still looked uneasy. The division in the room was clear. After the meeting, Daniel returned to his home, to find Leora standing by the door with her bag again. She looked at him with tear-filled eyes. "They'll all be safer if I go," she said. "No," Daniel replied simply, stepping between her and the door. "You told me you ran for days to keep your son safe. You can't throw that away now." She looked down, her voice breaking. "I would give them my life if it meant Rian would live." Daniel's voice softened. "I know, but there's another way. We stand together." The next morning, the shapes on the ridge were gone, but Daniel knew they hadn't left. They were just waiting, testing the settlement's fear. Hale ordered the watch doubled, and Daniel took the first shift at the gate. The hours were long and silent. Until movement caught his eye near the tree line. A small group was approaching. There, steps slow but confident. As they came closer, the details became clear. Armor made of black leather and steel. Faces covered with scarves, long rifles slung across their backs, and, at the front, a tall man with a cruel smile. The guards tensed, hands gripping their weapons. The tall man stopped a short distance from the gate, his voice carrying easily. Through the cold air, "We're here for the woman and the boy," he called. "Give them to us, and we'll leave your wall standing." Daniel stepped forward, his hands resting on the rifle slung over his shoulder. "Not happening," he said. The man's smile widened. "You think you can stop us, human? We have burned cities for less." Daniel didn't blink. "Then you'll find this city harder to burn than you think." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then the man laughed, a low, mocking sound. "We'll be back, and when we come, there won't be enough graves for all of you." They turned and walked away. But Daniel knew it was not retreat. It was a promise. When he returned to his home, Leora was waiting. She had heard the exchange from inside, her face pale, but her eyes steady. "They'll come back," she said. "Yes," Daniel replied. "And when they do, we'll be ready." Outside, the settlement worked late into the night, reinforcing walls, sharpening weapons, and preparing for the fight they all now knew was coming. The air was heavy with fear, but under it, there was also something else: resolve. The morning sky was pale and cold, a thin mist hanging low over the settlement. Daniel stood at the gate, his rifle across his chest. The air felt heavier than usual, the kind of stillness that only comes before something bad. From the wall, one of the watchmen called down, "They're coming." His voice was sharp, urgent. Daniel stepped forward and looked toward the ridge. The slavers were no longer just shadows in the distance. They were a dark line moving steadily across the plain, dozens of them armored in black leather and dull steel, weapons strapped to their backs, banners fluttering with crude symbols. At their front was the same tall man from yesterday, his cruel smile visible even from far away. The gates creaked as Hale climbed up to the top of the wall, his voice firm as he called out orders. "Positions, everyone." Now, guards rushed into place, bows drawn, rifles ready, barricades pushed tighter against the gate. Daniel's eyes swept the ground in front of them. No cover, no place to hide. If the slavers charged, it would be straight and fast. He tightened his grip on his weapon behind him. He heard footsteps turning. He saw Leora standing at the base of the wall, her face pale, but her eyes determined. "Go back inside," he said quickly. But she shook her head. "If they take me, it ends. If they don't, you all die fighting for me." Daniel stepped down from the wall, coming close to her, his voice low. "We've been through this. They won't stop with you. They'll take more. Burn everything. We fight here. Together." Rion peeked out from behind her, clutching her skirt, his small face tight with fear. Daniel crouched to meet his eyes. "You stay inside with your mother, no matter what happens." The boy nodded slowly. The sound of heavy boots on hard ground grew louder. The slavers stopped just outside the range of the wall. The tall man stepped forward, his voice carrying in the cold air. "This is your last chance. Give us the woman and the boy, and you'll live." Daniel climbed the wall and looked down at him, his voice clear. "Not happening." The man's smile faded into a sneer. "You think you're protecting her, but you're only signing your own death." Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he raised his rifle slightly, the message clear. The slaver leader's hand lifted, and his men began to spread out, forming a wide arc around the settlement's front. Daniel's eyes followed their movements, counting numbers, looking for weaknesses. Hale signaled to the archers, fingers tightening on bowstrings. One of the slavers shouted something, and suddenly, the still Air exploded into movement. A rush of boots and the harsh clatter of weapons. Arrows flew from the wall, rifles cracked, and the first line of slavers fell, but they kept coming. Slamming against the outer barricades, hacking at wood with blades, trying to climb, Daniel fired, reloaded, fired again, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. Hale's voice roared over the chaos. Hold the line. The slaver leader moved through the fight like a shadow. Barking orders, striking at the defenders. Daniel saw him heading toward the gate, cutting down anyone in his way. Without thinking, Daniel leaped from the wall to the ground below. His boots hitting hard, he pushed through the fighting until he was face to face with the man. The clash was fast, steel against steel. The man's strikes were heavy, but Daniel matched them with speed. Around them, the battle raged, the sound of shouting, metal, and gunfire blending into one unbroken roar. The slaver leader swung hard, forcing Daniel back a step. "She's mine," he snarled. Daniel spat rainwater from his lips. "Not while." "I'm breathing," he said, driving forward with a sudden burst of strength. The man stumbled. Daniel slammed the butt of his rifle into his chest, knocking him to the ground before he could rise. An arrow from the wall struck the ground beside his head, sending him rolling away, shouting for his men to fall back. Slowly, the noise began to fade. The slavers retreating into the mist, dragging their wounded, their leader's voice echoing. "This isn't over." Before vanishing into the distance, Daniel stood, breathing hard, his hands aching from the fight. Hale stepped up beside him, his voice low. "You bought us time, but they'll be back." Daniel glanced toward his home, where Leora and Rian waited behind the locked door. He nodded slowly. "Then we'll be ready." The settlement began to clear the battlefield, dragging away broken barricades. Tending to the wounded, the people moved with silent determination. No one needed to be told what was at stake anymore. Inside his home, Daniel found Leora kneeling by the fire, holding Rian close. Her eyes searched his face, and when she saw he was alive, her shoulders eased. "They're gone," she asked. "For now," Daniel replied, "but they'll try again." Leora's voice was quiet but steady. "Then I will help fight." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, seeing the resolve there, and for the first time since she arrived, he realized she was not just someone to protect, but someone who would stand beside him. Outside, the settlement's fires burned brighter against the mist. The walls still standing, the people still alive. And for now, that was enough. The morning after the fight was quiet, but not the peaceful kind. It was the kind of silence that comes after noise and chaos, the kind where people walk slowly, speaking in low voices, counting the cost of what happened, smoke from the burned barricades still hung in the air, mixing with the sharp smell of metal and ash. Daniel walked the length of the wall, checking the damage. Wooden beams were splintered, metal bars bent, and patches of blood stained the dirt outside. Hale was already there, speaking with a group of guards. "We hold for now," he said, "but next time they will come in greater numbers." His tone carried no comfort. Daniel moved on, his boots crunching over scattered arrows. A few scavengers were outside the gate, gathering whatever they could from the fallen slavers. Weapons, bits of armor, anything that might be useful. When Daniel reached his home, he found Leora kneeling by the fire, her hands busy with a pot of soup. Rian sat beside her, peeling a small vegetable with slow, careful movements. When they looked up and saw him, their faces softened. "You're back," Leora said quietly, as if she had been holding her breath since he left. "I told you I would be," Daniel replied, setting his rifle against the wall. Rian stood and walked over, holding out the peeled vegetable like it was a gift. Daniel took it with a small smile. "Looks perfect," he said. They sat together for the first real meal since the attack. The soup was simple but warm, and for a while no one spoke. The Sound of the fire filling the space between them. After they ate, Daniel told them what he had seen. "They'll come back," he said. "Hale thinks they'll bring more men, maybe even siege weapons." Leora's hands tightened on her cup. "Then we must be ready," she said, her voice steadier than before. That afternoon, the settlement worked as one. Walls were repaired. Traps were set along the outer field. Even the children carried water and small supplies to the workers. Daniel saw Leora moving among them, helping to carry wood, her scarf pulled tight against the cold. Some of the townspeople still avoided her, their eyes suspicious, but others had begun to greet her with nods, a quiet sign that her place here was slowly becoming more accepted. As the sun set, Daniel took a walk outside the walls with two other guards. They checked for tracks, finding fresh boot prints leading away into the hills. "They didn't go far," one guard said. "They're watching us," Daniel agreed. That night, Daniel stayed awake long after everyone else had gone to bed, sitting near the small window, watching the darkness, his thoughts heavy. He knew the slavers wouldn't risk another small attack next time. They would come hard and fast, in the middle of the night. Leora's voice came softly from behind him. "You should sleep," she said. Daniel turned to see her wrapped in a blanket, her hair loose over her shoulders. "Can't," he replied. "Not when I know they're out there." She stepped closer, her eyes on him. "You've done more for me and Rian than anyone ever has. I don't want you to die because of us." Daniel shook his head. "You're part of this place now, and we take care of our own for a moment." The only sound was the faint crackle of the fire. Then Leora whispered, "Before my husband was taken, he told me, if I ever found a place where someone stood for me, I should stand for them too." She looked straight into Daniel's eyes. "I will fight beside you." The next morning, Daniel found her speaking with Hale, asking to learn how to use a bow. Hale was skeptical, but Daniel vouched for her, and by midday, she was practicing in the training yard. Her movements awkward at first, but improving with each shot. Rian followed them everywhere, curious about everything. Daniel showed him how to hold a small practice spear. The boy's arms were weak, but his face lit up when he managed to hold it steady. The days passed quickly, the settlement preparing for the inevitable. Daniel could feel the change. The fear was still there, but it was turning into something stronger. A shared determination. One evening, as the last light faded, a runner came from the outer watch with news. "Smoke on the horizon," he said. "A lot of it." Hale's face tightened. "They're burning the outer villages." Daniel's stomach turned. He knew what that meant. The slavers were clearing a path, destroying anyone who might warn or help them. That night, he stood again at the wall, looking into the dark. Leora came up beside him, bow in hand, her voice quiet, but certain. "They're coming." Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the black horizon. "And this time, we finish it." The morning came with no sunrise, only a wall of dark clouds pressing low over the land. The air was sharp, with the smell of smoke drifting in from miles away. Daniel stood at the wall with Hale, both silent as they watched the horizon. Shapes began to form in the mist, first shadows, then figures. Then the clear sight of a massive slaver force. This time there was no doubt they had brought everything. Rows of soldiers, heavy wagons, and crude siege engines built from blackened wood and rusted steel. The sound reached them next, a deep, rolling drumbeat, the steady march of boots, the rattling of chains, the shouts of men who knew they were coming to take and destroy. Hale gave a single nod, and the defenders moved into position, archers lined. The wall's riflemen took their places. Barricades were reinforced one last time. Daniel checked his weapon, his mind already focused on the fight ahead. Leora stood beside him, bow in hand, her face pale but her eyes hard. She wore a worn leather vest over her clothes, the quiver strapped tight across her back. Rian was safe inside the council hall, guarded by the oldest and strongest members. Who could not fight, the slavers stopped just outside the range of the wall. Their leader riding forward on a black horse, his voice carrying in the cold air. "This is your last chance. Give us the woman and the boy, and we will spare the rest." Daniel stepped up to the edge of the wall, his voice clear. "No." The leader smiled. But it was not the smile of amusement. It was the smile of a predator who thinks the hunt is already over. His hand dropped, and the slavers surged forward, the sound of their charge shaking the ground. Arrows flew from the wall. Rifles cracked. The first line of slavers fell, but more came. Ladders slammed against the walls. Grappling hooks bit into the wood. Defenders hacked at them, shoving them back, the air filled with smoke, shouts, and the metallic clash of weapons. Daniel fired, reloaded, fired again. Moving along the wall to where the fight was thickest, Hale barked orders. Men pushed oil barrels. Over the edge, flames roared as the oil caught fire, forcing the slavers back on the west side. One of the siege engines struck the wall. The wood shuddered under the impact. Daniel rushed there with a small group, hacking and shoving at the slavers trying to climb through. An arrow whistled past his head, striking one of the attackers in the throat. Daniel turned to see Leora, her bow drawn again. Her movements sharp and certain. She nodded once and fired another shot. The fight dragged on, minutes feeling like hours. The ground outside the wall was littered with bodies. But still, the slavers pressed forward, their leader shouting for them to break through. Then came the moment Daniel had feared. The main gate shook violently. The heavy beam holding it began to crack. Hale's voice roared, "To the gate, now!" Daniel and Leora raced there, pushing through the smoke and chaos. The beam snapped, and the gate burst inward. The slavers poured in like a black tide. The fight inside the settlement was fierce and close, swords clashing, fists striking. Daniel found himself face to face with the leader again, the man's blade flashing in the firelight. "You should have given her to me." The slaver snarled, swinging hard. Daniel blocked, their weapons locking for a moment. "You'll never have her," Daniel growled, forcing him back. Leora appeared at Daniel's side, losing an arrow that struck the leader's shoulder. He roared in pain, staggering. Daniel seized the moment, driving him to the ground. The fight between them ended with the crack of a rifle butt against the slaver's head. Around them, the defenders pushed harder, driving the slavers back toward the broken gate. Hale's voice rose above the chaos, pushed them out, bit by bit. The tide turned, the slavers retreated, dragging their wounded. Their leader, half-conscious and bleeding. His threats fading into the distance as they fled into the mist. Silence returned, broken only by the crackle of small fires and the groans of the wounded. The settlement still stood, battered but unbroken. Daniel leaned against the wall. Breathing hard, Leora came to him, her hands shaking but her eyes bright. "We're still here," she said softly. He nodded. Looking toward the council hall where Rianne waited, they walked there together, pushing open the door to find the boy running to them. Throwing his arms around both at once, for the first time since she had arrived, Leora smiled without fear. Daniel rested a hand on the boy's head. The warmth of the moment cutting through the cold of the day. In the days that followed, repairs began. The people moved with a new energy. They had faced the worst and stood together. Leora worked beside the others, no longer seen as an outsider. Rian played with the settlement children, his laughter mixing with theirs. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Daniel sat outside his home, Leora and Rian beside him, the fire casting soft light over their faces. She looked at him quietly for a moment before saying, "You didn't just save us. You gave us a place to belong." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then stay as long as you want." And so they did. Not as strangers rescued from the cold, but as part of the settlement, part of something worth fighting for. part of a family that had chosen each other.